Good day, class. Let's go ahead and start our discussion on Chapter 7, Evaluating Employee Performance. The learning objectives: know how to create a performance appraisal instrument, how to administer a performance appraisal system, understand the problems associated with performance ratings, be able to conduct a performance appraisal review, understand how to legally terminate an unproductive employee, learn how to monitor the legality of a performance appraisal system. So let's start off by talking about what is an effective and legal performance appraisal system. Well, here are some of the things that we look for. Are job related and based on a job analysis. Again, we see the critical role that job analysis plays in IO psychology and in the running of most organizations. They are properly administered, meaning that they are formalized, they're standardized, and they're not too complicated. They're simplified. So we want to make sure that this is something that's not taking place around a water cooler, for example, that there's a formal time and place for these types of reviews and the systems in place, those things there. That they are standardized for each part of the organization, that there is a standard way that they go about them, and that they are simplified. People should understand what's going on. They should provide specific feedback, focus on behaviors rather than traits. Ratings are documented. This was hammered into me numerous times as a new supervisor and manager, that you need to document. When you are rating somebody poorly on some particular facet of the job, there needs to be documentation to back that up. So ratings are going to be documented. The evidence for these ratings are going to be documented. Use appropriate raters. That is, raters that are trained. Don't throw somebody into this appraisal situation without the proper training. All relevant raters are to be used, and raters used must be relevant and qualified. So here are some of the steps in developing the system. You create a task force that includes all levels in the organization. Each level within an organization may have a slightly different perspective on performance or how things should be done. Determine why you are evaluating performance. What is your goal? Now, as it's noted here, most systems do not have a goal. 90% of the systems, according to SHRM survey work, shows that they do not have systems that actually do work. Most of that is probably going to be due to them not having a goal set for themselves. And also note this: will improving individual performance improve organizational performance? Not necessarily. There are so many factors that come into play when it comes to an organization's performance. Other factors that may influence the bottom line more so even than the workers in a particular factory, for example. And then identify environmental and cultural variables that could affect the system. Now, we wanted to determine the sources to be used in appraising performance. Here are some assumptions. According to the work by Cohen and Jenkins, supervisors and raters are fair, objective, and unbiased. Should be. Supervisors and employees will not try to manipulate performance ratings to get desired outcomes. Should be. Raters can adequately distinguish an individual's performance from the situational constraints or the system. Should be. So Cohen and Jenkins believe that if these assumptions are not true, you should not conduct a performance appraisal because they're going to be tainted. They're going to be biased in some significant way. People need to be fair, objective, and unbiased. They need to not try to manipulate or game the system. They need to be able to distinguish an individual's performance from other situational constraints. So, that in mind, we need to determine the best method to accomplish your goal. So first, one, determine purpose for the appraisal. Well, the general idea of an appraisal system really comes back to the notion of providing feedback. People need to know how they are doing so they can correct their behavior or keep doing what they're doing if they're doing quite well. So 65% of those researched basically say that we are doing the performance appraisal system. The purpose of it is for feedback and for training purposes, identifying those areas in need of improvement, for example. Then we have personnel decisions. 86% are doing them for raises, to give somebody a raise, a bump in pay. 45% for promotions, give them a job with greater responsibility, okay, greater areas of control, those types of things. And then 30%, we're using these to help us determine who needs to be let go, termination decisions. And of course, we may do these types of purpose of appraisal systems in order to conduct research or for legal or certification reasons. Identify environmental and cultural limitations. Supervisors are highly overworked. If you have a supervisor that is highly overworked, an elaborate, time-consuming performance appraisal system will not be successful. They're busy trying to keep the machines of the organization running, and then they have to do this. This is not to say this is not part of their job. It is. But if you're going to have something that's going to be very elaborate or time-consuming, okay, the system will not be successful. In an environment in which there is no money available for merit pay, developing a numerically complex system will become frustrating, and the results of the evaluation may not be taken seriously. So if one of the goals that has been set for the organization is to determine what they do when they have money, to give the money out to the employees via merit pay, if there is no money, doing the system will be very problematic. In an environment in which employees are very cohesive, the use of peer ratings might reduce the cohesiveness, meaning that you have a very cohesive group and now you're saying you should rate your colleagues, rate your peers. It could sort of disrupt things somewhat. Determine who will evaluate performance. Here are some of the individuals who are likely to be able to evaluate performance. Upper management, direct supervisor, your peers, subordinates, the people who work for you, support staff, your administrative assistant or secretary, customers or the public, people who come into your place of business and they are your customers and you serve them or provide them with certain products. They have an idea about your particular performance as well. Vendors, people who supply you products. For example, if you work at some sort of grocery store and the people who bring in the dairy products, for example, a vendor that supplies you that material, your interaction with them can also be evaluated. And then, of course, self-evaluation. All of these are possible ways in which you can evaluate someone's performance. Now, all of this is going to be intent on the idea of your observations, what you have observed. This little chart here to the right just demonstrates that not everything is going to be observed. So we have a slice of all the possibilities of what can be observed is going to be observed only by the employee or the peers, or observed only by the subordinates or only by the supervisor, because there's no one around you all the time that can see everything that you're going to do. It's a very unlikely situation in an organization. Now, this represents one idea of how it is that you can get feedback that's really good. It's the 360-degree feedback. That's like the full circle. All right. Now, according to research done in 2005, 28% of organizations have utilized this 360 feedback. Now, the survey here from HRM basically says 18% for non-exempt positions, 29% for exempt positions, and 32 for executive level positions. Now, if you really think about it, especially the executive level positions, usually these individuals are not going to be the type of position that's producing something other than reports or a major project which they may have not done personally. They just led it. You want to get a good idea, a fuller idea of how they're working in the organization. That's probably why we see 32% at that level are going to be going through this 360 feedback system. Here are a few suggestions about the 360 feedback system. If it's employed, use 4 to 10 raters. It should take only about 15 minutes to complete, and provide the feedback within 6 weeks of evaluation. So it's fresh information. If it's gotten to them in a reasonable amount of time, they can then adjust, because next quarter they may totally be a different situation. So the feedback needs to be fresh feedback given to them within 6 weeks. Now, here is the agreement among raters, okay, by research of Conway and Huffcutt, 1997 meta-analysis. So what they're looking at, they're trying to find out the level of agreement between two individuals rating one individual. Okay, so let's look at this. The agreement between two supervisors seems to be the highest at 0.5 correlation. So that's decent, I guess. And then we have two peers, 0.37. Two subordinates, 0.30. The supervisor and the peer, so like above you and below you, 0.34. And then supervisor, subordinate, supervisor himself, and peer and subordinate, all 0.22. And then peer and self, 0.19. So here we see we have a lot more agreement between the two supervisors. So then we want to select the appraisal method. What will be the focus of the dimensions? So we got to have something that we're focusing on doing our performance appraisal system. All right, so what will be the focus? We can look at it as goal focus. Okay, we're looking for some sort of results. For example, it could be to prevent crimes from occurring, finish shift without injury, okay, personal injury, have arrest and citations stand up in court. So what we're looking at here are some possible dimensions for a police officer. Task focus, is it crime prevention, arrest procedures, court testimony, the use of your vehicle? Or is it trait focused, honesty, courtesy, responsibility, dependability or cooperation, or competency focused? How well are you writing your reports? What are your driving skills like? Your ability to speak in public? And what is your knowledge of the law? So these are decisions that have to be made by what are you focusing on? What area is of interest to your organization at this time when you're doing these performance appraisals? So how will performance be appraised? We have a variety of ways that we can look at it. We have employee comparisons, where we can put them in rank order, or pair them up in paired comparison, or do a forced distribution, where some people will be a lot of people will be in the middle, and then you'll force some people to be high achievers and some to be low achievers, in a sense. Okay, and the results can be quantitative. They can look at accidents, absenteeism, tardiness, and then of course you have subjective ratings as well. So, should we use employee comparison, objective measures, or ratings? We have employee comparison methods, rank order. A rank order is basically a method of performance appraisal in which employees are ranked from best to worst. We have paired comparison, a form of ranking in which a group of employees to be ranked are compared one pair at a time. And then we have forced distribution, a performance appraisal method in which a predetermined percentage of employees are placed into a number of performance categories. Again, we force them into these distributions. So here's an example of a ranking method. So we have a scale here of 1 to 5. we're going to assume here that 5 is better. They're ranked high on a particular knowledge or dependability or quality. And we just rank them this way. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so we have Cook with the 5, Sparks 4, Hicks 3, Underwood 2, Barino 1 for knowledge, and then we do the same type of thing for dependability and quality, each given a rating. Then we can do the average, and we can see who comes out on top in this ranking method with a higher score. Then we have an example of paired comparison method. So here we have these paired comparisons. Green and Briscoe, Green and Ray, Green and Logan, Green, Soretta, Briscoe, Ray, Briscoe, Logan, so on and so forth. So what you're going to do is each time you do a comparison, you, for example, will circle the person who is the better employee within each pair. So let's say we see the bold here, and the bold represents our scoring. So we select Green as better than Briscoe, Green is better than Ray, Green is better than Logan, Green is better than Soretta, Briscoe better than Ray, Briscoe better than Logan, Briscoe better than Soretta, Ray is not better than Logan, okay? Ray is better than Soretta, and Logan is better than Soretta. So by doing this, we have now a paired comparisons and who is the victors as illustrated by those items or those names which are bolded. And when the numbers are low enough, what you're basically doing here is simply just counting the number of times that they are in bold or circled if you do that. So in this example, we would say that employee Green gets a rating of 4, Briscoe a 3, Ray a 1, Logan a 2, and Soretta 0. Now let's look at the other one, the example of a forced distribution. Now this should sound somewhat familiar. In a standard way in which we do a curve for grading, for example, we may try to make it look like a normal distribution, a forced distribution. So some people are going to be forced to be in one tail end of the curve, another's going to be forced to be at the upper end of the curve, where most of the individuals are going to fall in the middle of the curve. That's what we're seeing here. So we have in the middle here a bunch of individuals, Aniston, Stone, Theron, and Bullock, average 40%. And then we go to the left, we look at Portman and Kunis, 20%, that's below average. Then we go to the right of average, we have above average then, Lawrence and Stewart at 20%. And then we go looking at the far left, we have Roberts, terrible, 10%, and then Jolie, excellent, 10%. So what we've done, we have forced a distribution. So here it is a performance appraisal method, again, in which a predetermined percentage of employees are placed into a number of performance categories. We force it. Now, as you probably recall from your experiences with forced distribution, if you were lucky enough to go through this process, when it comes to grades for tests, for example, the question always comes up, does Jolie deserve that grade, or does Roberts really deserve that grade? Because we're forcing these grades in a sense. We're forcing them to fall into a variety of categories. So in this instance, the Jolies would be the A's, the Roberts, the Allison, and so on and so forth. And so the idea, it may not seem always as fair. It may be more easily conducted at sometimes, just force people into these categories. But there is some degree of issue that sometimes people have with this process. Now let's look at objective measures. Objective measures, again, are those types of things that we can count, that we can quantify, that we can look at and see objectively. One person can say, I objectively see this, and so you see the same type of thing. So we can look at the quantity of work, the quality of work, attendance, including such things as absenteeism, tardiness, time theft, and safety. Then we look at ratings of performance. We can use graphic rating scales or behavior-based methods, such as behavioral checklists or behaviorally anchored rating scales, behavioral observation scales, behavioral expectation scales, mixed standard scales, or forced choice scales. So what is a graphic rating scale? A graphic rating scale is a method of performance appraisal that involves rating employee performance on an interval or ratio scale. So that's the key thing. It's just a scale that we're utilizing. Behavioral checklists consist of a list of behaviors, expectations, or results for each dimension you're interested in. Behaviorally anchored rating scales is a method of performance appraisal involving the placement of benchmark behaviors next to each point on a graphic rating scale. Behavioral observation scales is a method of performance appraisal in which supervisors rate the frequency of observed behaviors. The behavioral expectation scale is a scale ranging from level 1 to level 4, for example, with titles ranging from falling below expectations 1 to exceeding expectations 4. And then we have also the mixed standards scale. The mixed standard scale is a method of performance appraisal in which a supervisor reads the description of a specific behavior and then decides whether the behavior of the employee is better than, equal to, or poorer than the behavior described. And then we have the forced choice scales. This is a method of performance appraisal in which a supervisor is given several behaviors and is forced to choose which of them is most typical of the employee. So that gives you a really brief idea of what these ratings of performance scales actually entail. Here's an example of a graphic rating scale. So we have a rating here of either poor or excellent for job knowledge, patrol activity, decision making, and use of weapons. So we have here a customer wanted to deposit a large amount of money. The teller explained to the customer that he could earn more interest on money market account than with a savings account. Well, this represents a behavioral anchored rating scale. So we see that there are examples of behaviors tied to this graphic scale here from 1 to 5, giving you sort of an example of a behavior that falls in a particular category. So here, at the very bottom, a customer wanted to cash a large check. The teller said that it would not be cashed, but did not realize that it was all right as long as the customer had the amount in her account. So that was the low end, and the one I just mentioned earlier was on the high end of a 5. So this is a anchored rating scale, behaviorally anchored rating scale. Then we have here radio procedures. This is an example of a behavioral checklist. So here you have the behaviors, and all you would do here is check the items. So once the appropriate items have been checked above, you would then go to the bottom for the dimension rating for radio procedures, and then select the one that best suits the results of this particular assessment. Here's an example of a forced choice scale. So you are basically being forced to look at a most and a least for the particular employee. So here, most, teller is always on time. Least, teller smiles at each customer. All right. Again, for number 2, least, teller usually cross-sells. Most, teller keeps work area neat and orderly. Then we have the example of a mixed standard scale. You can see in parentheses after each statement here, you have P, A, and E. P stands for poor, E for excellent, and A for average. So you place a plus after the statement if this typical behavior of the tailor is usually better than the represented in the statement, a 0 if the typical behavior of the tailor is about the same as the represented in the statement, or a minus if the typical behavior of the tailor is worse than that represented. So here you see that items 1, 4, and 5 are for the employee relations dimension. Items 2, 3, 6, and 6 are for the customer relations dimensions. Now we have an example of a behavioral observation scale. So we see two areas of job knowledge and employee relations. 1, is aware of current interest rates. 2, offer suggestions to customers about how they can make the most interest. And 3, knows various strategies for converting IRAs and so on and so forth. Same ideas with employee relations. Offers to help other employees when on workload is down. Praises other employee when they do well. The types of rating scales. We have performance-based, the extent to which expectations have been met, exceeds expectations, meets expectations. Normative-based, comparison to other employees above average or average. And frequency-based, always or sometimes. Example of scale types, comparison to other employees. Dimension, refers to customers by name. Much better than other tailors, better than other tailors, the same as, worse than, much worse than. Example of scale types frequency, refers to customers by name. Always, almost always, often, seldom, never. Example of scale types extent to which expectations were met, refers to customers by name. Greatly exceeds expectations, meets expectations, falls below expectations, falls well below expectations. Also, we need to focus on training the raters. Although training supervisors to evaluate performance is essential to a sound and legal performance appraisal system, several surveys found that few organizations spend the time and resources necessary to do this properly. But the research does say when we do have training on rating errors, for example, and how to avoid them, it often increases accuracy and reduces rating errors. We also see other research that says that it increases the validity of tests, validated against the ratings, increases employee satisfactions with the system as well. So, also going back to what we mentioned earlier, we want to observe and document performance. That will be essential to the whole process. Why document performance? It forces supervisors to look for behaviors. So throughout the year or throughout the quarter, you have the task as a supervisor manager to look for these behaviors so that it can be documented. It aids in recall during evaluation. It provides examples to use when reviewing performance and provides concrete data to support personnel decisions. Remember, if you're going to fire someone, okay, take away their livelihood, this is something that is very sensitive to people. And if it's going to be based on something like a firing offense or poor productive behavior, you need to have that documented somewhere. And again, a slide that we've seen before, I'm sure, noting that we have all this behavior, but then we only really truly observe a smaller amount of that, and then we only store a smaller amount of that, and we can recall even a smaller amount of that. So we have to understand that we should be doing this along the way, documenting, documenting, documenting. Okay, so what we tend to remember. We tend to remember the following: first impressions, recent behaviors, unusual behaviors, extreme behaviors, and behaviors that are consistent with your opinions. So again, first impressions, that's one thing. When you first start working with someone, you get their first impressions, which may have some impact on future observations, but first impressions. Then what's the most recent thing they've done? Something unusual that they've done, something extreme that they've done. These are not necessarily going to be representative of this person's true behavior. So again, our memory here is going to be influenced by these factors. What we tend to forget: details about what went on, what led to this. So there was a behavior that might have been somewhat unusual, but maybe we forgot what were the factors that led to that behavior. Or we remember someone saying something about something that happened, but we don't remember the source of the information. We just remember the information itself. Those can be problematical as well. So we have these critical incidents. Critical incidents are examples of poor or excellent performance. They provide behavioral examples, and they are usually collected through logs, so like a little log book that someone may maintain of incidents, which will later be sort of identified as being poor or excellent examples of performance. The employee performance record can be used. So here is the performance record example. So we have these dimensions, okay, already set up. Knowledge of law, we're back to the police example. Knowledge of law, report writing, patrol performance. Then we have the categories of poor and excellent performance. And here we have dates and examples. So knowledge of law, March 17th, arrest procedure ruled okay by court. Report writing, January 25th, accident report contained 5 typos. Report writing, January 30th, well-written report. February 7th, well-written report. Patrol performance, poor performance, March 16th. Complaint from motorist that officer did not help. So, moving on, we go about doing the actual evaluating of performance. Evaluating performance, we read critical incident logs, okay, obtain and review objective data such as traffic citations, arrests, complaints, commendations, accidents. And again, this is for the police here, but we can imagine certain types of things that we could collect for jobs that you've had in the past or where you're working now. Common rating errors, halo or horns, range restriction, location errors. So let's review some of these common rating errors a little bit more deeply here. First, when we talk about halo or horns, you may have heard of this before. The idea is when you meet somebody for an interview, for example, you get that first good impression or you like one particular characteristic about them. It can taint everything else. So if you put a halo on them, everything they do during that interview may seem somewhat angelic or positive, that is, advantageous to the organization. Whereas if you put sort of like a negative spin, a negative connotation on them, give them horns like you were a devil, so to speak, then things can be looked at sort of as a disadvantage. Everything that you look at with regard to their previous work, their experiences, may have sort of a negative connotation on it. That's what we mean sort of by halo or horns. That first impression that is made sometimes that sort of can set the stage for the relationship. Then we talk about range restriction, and what this is basically getting to is the idea that your behavior during the interview, or at least how you are assessing the person that you're interviewing, you may restrict the range on their behavior, or you may be too lenient, for example, which you may commit leniency error, a type of rating error in which the rater consistently gives all employees high ratings regardless of their actual levels of performance. Since they're so high, you're sort of like restricting your range. You can't go higher. If you meet someone at the very end that is extraordinarily outstanding, by far better than everyone else you met that day, you sort of put yourself sort of like in a bind because you only have so much more or no room at all because you've been rating them so highly. You also have strictness error, where a type of rating error in which the rater consistently gives all employees low ratings regardless of their actual levels of performance. And then you have central tendency error. You know what that is. A rating error in which the rater consistently gives all employees in the middle of the scale regardless of their actual levels of performance. So those are some of the key errors that we talk about. Then we have location errors. What we mean by that is, for example, like proximity. Proximity errors occur when a rating made on one dimension affects the rating made on the dimension that immediately follows it on the rating scale. Because you rated them one way, that subsequent rating may be affected by what you just rated them as. And then you have the contrast errors. The performance rating one person receives can be influenced by the performance of a previously evaluated person. For example, if you are interviewing someone and their performance is horrible, horrible, and they are probably someone you wouldn't want to hire, for example, and then you see someone next following that person who is mediocre, but they're going to benefit from the fact that you just saw somebody who was absolutely horrible for the job or had horrible, horrible performance, and now their performance is going to be seen as much better because of the contrast effect. So we have issues out there. One of the issues is low rater reliability. Raters don't often agree. Why? Well, there's common rating errors, just errors that do occur. We have different standards of comparisons, and then observations of different behaviors. We can't get around the fact that if you have two people that you report to and they're the ones who are observing your performance, they may see different things. Therefore, the rating reliability is going to be rather low there. So those are going to be some problems that we see in this type of scenario. So it could be a whole host of reasons as to why they may have these different scores for this particular employee. But it could simply mean there's some sort of contamination. It could depend on what time of day or a day of the week that one supervisor may see this employee. It may be different in some significant manner to another time of day when the other supervisor sees and then is able to observe this particular employee's behavior. So that leads us to this other issue. Consider sources of contamination. Contamination, meaning that not all employees are going to be treated equally because they may be working in different geographic areas, have different shifts, work the night shift. So the idea is that these things can have an impact on how we are judging their performance. So, for example, a sales example for traveling sales personnel for an organization, if they have a really bad area that has been hit, more can have a lot more economic damage due to the economy, then they're going to suffer with lower sales potentially. So the geographic area may impact their sales. It could be a supervisor issue. Someone may get a new supervisor or a supervisor on their way out or a disgruntled supervisor who your teammates or your peers you're working with. It could be shoddy equipment. It could be that there's no incentives around, or it could be some training issue, or it could just simply be the time of the year or the season. So we need to be able to consider a whole host of possible reasons why there may be some contamination. I'm not trying to say we're trying to excuse people for poor performance, but we need to be realistic and realize that sometimes performance is going to be impacted by things outside of our control. Other rating issues is dealing with how frequently you're going to be rating individuals. Will it be semi-annually, annually? Will it be more frequent during the time of probation? The probation period for a particular employee. Will there be a degree of formality? How formal it's going to be? So all of these also have to be taken into consideration. And obviously, the more performance reviews you're having, the more practice people may get at doing it. But of course, it's going to take a lot of time as well, depending on the workload and the organization. So these things are other issues that do consider are relevant enough to think about when you have your performance appraisal system and are doing your performance appraisals. And then, of course, you want to communicate appraisal results to the employees. An effective performance appraisal review interviews. Well, here are some of the characteristics. The employee input prior to the meeting, so they're not going to be blindsided with some sort of information. Okay, they'll be able to at least put some input and have something to say about that particular review situation. High level employee participation, so they know what the system looks like. Maybe they help to develop the system. Helpful supervisor attitude. They're not standoffish. They have the open door policy. They're willing to talk about some issues, things of that nature. Focus on behaviors rather than traits. We're not talking about personalities here. We're talking about what it is that people do. We can't go around trying to change people's personality, but of course, we are going to be looking at what it is they do, their actual behavior. The identification of solutions to problems. Okay, so is there a problem that maybe was brought to your attention as the supervisor during that open door time frame, open door policy? You want to be able to identify some potential solutions to problems. You want to have mutual setting of specific types of goals. Maybe you have some goals you establish for your employee. They have something they want to work on, and you work on some together. Consistent application of standards. Be consistent, particularly when employees talk to each other, because they do talk to each other. You want to be seen as being fair, just, and consistent with everyone. And the rater is familiar with the employee's work. Uh, I was with an organization one time where it was really odd. The person that did the rating of the employee was not their direct supervisor. So what would happen is the person who did the rating would talk to the direct line supervisor. So they would get a report from the immediate supervisor to the big boss, and the big boss would take that information and then do the review. Eventually, we did move to a more logical process where that frontline supervisor, the immediate supervisor, was the one who was actually conducting the employee performance reviews. Prior to the interview, we have employee preparation. Give a blank copy of forms to the employee. Have the employee rate him or herself, which is a standard process. Scheduling. Schedule at least an hour for the performance review. Scheduling the review in private, neutral location is ideal. Supervisor preparation. You review ratings and reasons for the ratings. Determine goals for the review. So it's like doing your homework. It's like doing any type of work for an organization. If you are a supervisor, you have to take that responsibility on to prep for your assignment, which is reviewing the ratings and the reasons behind the ratings, because there may be serious questions that the employee who's getting their performance evaluated may ask of you, and you want to have all your documentation and the reasons why they were rated such and such way on a particular item available to you. You may even anticipate what some of the questions may be, because maybe there are a few low ratings, and you want to make sure that you have all the information at your fingertips as you prep for that interview. So again, you want to make sure if there is a specific goal that you're trying to accomplish during this particular interview, make sure that you have set it up in such a way that you'll be able to accomplish it. During the interview, You're looking for a quiet, private location. You want to first establish rapport, have employee discuss self-ratings, discuss your ratings, identify problems and determine solutions, and then set goals. That is the normal process that you go through as you conduct these performance interviews. Now, anytime you're providing critical feedback to individuals, it can be somewhat stressful. People do not like at times getting criticized for anything, even if it's legitimate. So there is some issue there as well. But at times you will find yourself in a situation where you'll have to uh, have an employee dismissed from the organization, employee termination. So let's talk a little bit about that. So the legal reasons for terminating employees. In the public sector, we have the probationary period if it doesn't work out, the violations of rules, the inability to perform, do the task, and then laying someone off because of a variety of economic conditions. We do have private sector issues a little bit different. We do have certain states where we have employment at will too. That does change things a little bit as well. Well, I guess I should probably talk a little bit about some of these items real quickly here. That probationary period, you have many jobs they'll do when they hire somebody. They'll not say you are a permanent employee. They'll say there's going to be maybe like a 60-day or 90-day probationary period where you'll be able to judge whether or not you like working there for one thing, but also whether or not you're able to do the job to the degree of satisfaction they've laid out for you from the organization's perspective. And of course, if you violate certain types of company rules or policies, that will be a reason too for firing somebody or letting them go. And of course, the most obvious one was going to be if you just can't do the job as a new employee, the inability to perform is obviously a very legitimate reason to let someone go. The organization is trying to accomplish certain tasks and goals, and they've hired you to help them to meet those goals, those objectives of theirs, and if you can't do the job that was outlined for you to meet those objectives, then it's well within their right, and they should let you go because of that. Then we have the layoff. Obviously, that's more of a situation of reduction in force where they have to be terminated in the best interest of the organization to do so because maybe a contract fell through. Now, I was a consultant for a while, for years there, and I was not tied as an internal consultant, but sort of an external one, which meant that if we didn't get certain contracts that we were hoping to get, normally that would mean that some people would be getting laid off because it's the way we get fed. We have to have contracts from clients, and the clients pay us money. If we don't win certain contracts, we don't get the money, and then people are going to be laid off. So these are some legitimate reasons for this to be going on. Now, when it comes to employment at will, and we've already talked a little bit about private sector and some of the things that they can do because they don't have government contracts or they are a private entity. So we will talk about those a little bit later as we go. But employment at will statements in employment applications and company manuals reaffirming an organization's right to hire and fire at will. Now, this does change depending on some states that you're in, where there's a lot of union activity, where there is a union contract in place that will determine the factors that can be involved in letting someone go. So that makes things a little bit more complicated from the organization's perspective because of this third party involvement. It's not just the employee, the organization, it's the employee, the organization, and the union, which has a lot to say with it. So, violation of the organization's rules. First, a rule must exist. The employee must have known about the rule, so they need to make sure certain things have been communicated to them. Usually during the orientation and the onboarding process, there should be some indication that they are aware of these particular rules. Violation of the rule must be proven. The rule must be equally enforced, so you cannot enforce it with some and not others. And progressive discipline must occur, meaning that usually during the first infraction of some sort of rule, you don't let someone go. You give them a warning, okay, and then you may put them on some sort of probationary thing. And again, if it doesn't work, then you have your data all set up so that they can be let go from the organization. Progressive discipline punishment must fit the offense. A reasonable attempt must be made to change the behavior, as I was saying a minute ago, through counseling, training, an oral warning, a written warning, probation, suspension with pay, suspension without pay, transfer, reduction in pay, demotion, termination. So this organization here is giving this person, in their document here, giving this person a lot of leeway. It could be years before this person is let go, obviously, depending on what the issue is, obviously, and how frequently they do a check-in to each one of these things. So if we have a situation where there's an employee that's done something and you need to discipline them, and you've already given them the oral and written warning, you sit them down, you set out a plan to try to correct the behavior, and then you set usually a time frame as to when you'll be checking back in to review what the data is telling you. And then usually at that time as well, you would inform them what are the consequences if they are not going to be able to meet the requirements. Okay, then they'll know what to expect if they don't do what they're supposed to or are unable to do what they're supposed to. That termination will be a result of that. So we have the inability to perform. We have a standard of performance already set. It's concrete, it's reasonable, and it's job related. Okay, so that's one of the factors we're looking at for inability to perform. Documented failure to meet the standard is there. We have that critical incident log that we referred to not too long ago, work samples as well as performance ratings. And of course, we've already gone through or are going through that progressive discipline to try to get them to shape up, so to speak, or to be able to require some additional training if necessary. Now, obviously, all this stuff really ties together. If you have somebody who's just not able to do the job, we also would have to look at our selection tools and our selection system in place too, because if we hired them, we should have gotten some degree of confidence that they can do that job. So these things, I want to remind you that these things are all linked together. And again, the employment at will doctrine, the concept I've already communicated with you. There are limitations depending on federal and state laws, public policy or interest, the implied contracts, covenants of good faith and fair dealing. So there is some understanding. There is sort of a contract that is in place when you do hire somebody. But if those things are all in place and you have your at-will statements and you just don't want them there for some reason, it's a good chance that you'll be fine in letting them go. Again, at these at-will states, there really isn't so much that someone can do. So the termination meeting, prior to the meeting, you want to ensure that the legal process has been followed. I will let you know there was an individual that when I was managing at another location who was causing me all sorts of problems, causing the team all sorts of problems, and I wanted the person gone. But you had to have documentation, and I did have the documentation, lots of documentation. But the process where I was previously was you have to send it up to the in-house counsel, our attorney, and they would review it. And if there was anything that they were nervous about or thought could be a problem, they would wave you off and say, no, we don't want to do this now. Okay, so that has happened. In fact, that happened to me a couple of times. So we want to ensure that legal process has been followed, and sometimes lawyers, attorneys, legal counsels will err on the side of conservatism. So they prefer not to do anything just on the off chance that something winds up in a court dispute. So we also want to decide how much help you want to offer the employee. Choose a neutral and private place. Plan enough time for the meeting. Schedule the meeting for the beginning of the week. So the notion here is that you need to do some things to sort of set the stage for the termination meeting. In my experience, usually it doesn't come as too much of a surprise for people that they know something that has gone on, something that has happened, and they know potentially that they've not been able to meet the expectations of their bosses. So it may not be a full surprise, a total surprise for them. The termination meeting, during the meeting, get to the point, rationally state the reasons for the decision, express gratitude for the employee's efforts if sincere, offer whatever assistance you wish to provide, whether it be a recommendation or severance pay. Those are some serious things to consider. The severance pay, obviously, to tide you over for a while. Recommendation, because obviously it's always somewhat awkward or odd if you did not leave on the best of terms for an organization and you're still looking for a recommendation from them. Of course, you'll have several administrative duties to perform when it comes to items that may belong to the organization that may be in possession of this employee that's being terminated. Make sure things and items are returned. For example, credit cards or charge cards. Ask the employee to gather their personal belongings and leave. Sometimes it's going to be a situation as well where they will have security standing by too. That's a call that the organizations make, depending on how the person's let go or what they believe they know about the person, or things of that nature. That they'll have either security or some other representative with them as they're packing stuff up. Particularly if they had a position that held a great deal of responsibility and things of that nature. Normally, what would happen as well, have to make sure if you were about ready to terminate an employee that they did not have access to the company servers or email accounts. So usually that would be shut down beforehand. And key cards would probably be turned off as well. It's unfortunate, but that's what we have to do sometimes. Now, the termination meeting, after the meeting, maintain your self-esteem, protect yourself from guilt by reviewing the facts, help other employees cope, be honest with them. This will avoid water cooler whispers as to what really happened with John. Avoid negative public statements about the fired employee's character. And we talked about this in a previous lecture as well. That's something that organizations are somewhat reluctant to do because of particular legal ramifications. Notify all organizational units affected by the employee's departure. People need to know that that person, who may have been a critical and pivotal person at their organization, is no longer there. That it's going to be maintained, it's going to be empty for a while, or someone's going to be covering. So that needs to be taken care of too. Where will the work that used to flow to this individual, where will it flow now? So we want to monitor the legality and fairness of the system. Questions to ask: has the organization provided training? So we're talking about performance here, So have they provided training? Some types of things you have the required knowledge base, the education, the degree, and all that type of stuff. Some things, however, you have to get to know and learn and be trained on while you're at the organization to make sure the organization has done what they were supposed to do. Are there gender, race, ethnicity, disability, or age differences in the ratings? Again, these things can lead to some major issues as you start to do things that may adversely impact protected groups. Do employees with similar ratings receive similar rewards or consequences? You want to be seen as having fair treatment. That can be a problem if you don't. So treat people fairly and equally. Are there gender, race, ethnicity, disability, or age differences in the opportunities given to improve performance? If you have to have specialized training to get a very attractive promotion of a position in your organization, if it is noted that the people who are getting this specialized training are only generally of the majority, meaning that you're not seeing females, you're not seeing minorities or individuals who may have certain disabilities, if they're not popping up in this specialized training, you may have yourself an issue, because this training is leading to uh, promotions, is leading to greater pay. And these are things, as we've stated before, people have a great deal of sensitivity about when they're not given the same fair shake or opportunity that others may have that will lead to a better situation for themselves and their families. Are there employees who historically have received high ratings suddenly being given a low rating? That's sort of a red flag too. It could be a red flag for a variety of reasons. It could be a red flag that there may be some supervisor-employee issue, or there could be something going on with the employee, some personal issue that employee relations may want to get involved in to help them out, some stuff that they may be struggling through, health concerns, for example, or other mental issues that may be happening regarding their family. So again, we're trying to make sure that we're open to all these possibilities because in a way it sounds somewhat hokey, but with good organizations you do get that sense of family. Particularly if you've been with the organization for some time, you get this sense of family, that these are the individuals that you have seen for the last 10, 20 years or so. You've seen them grow old with you. You've seen their families grow up. And so when you change your behavior or they get let go or even retire, that can be a major change for people. And so we want to be there for them in organizations and our particular society. That's a major part. The organizations that we work with in our job or career, that's how we identify ourselves sometimes. It's really a great portion of our identity. And again, I think you have a Kohl's department store activity this term, this semester as well. So to be aware of all the rules and regulations, it's a very key thing so that employees are aware of what the rules are so they don't violate them. Okay, again, that will doctrine, we used to talk about this a little bit more, but again, the idea is organizations, they're in it normally. Businesses, they're trying to make money and trying to make a life, and they should have some ability, I would think, and you may think the same thing, some ability, especially if you're a business owner, to say who works for them and when they want to let somebody go. All right, so what do you think? Are there ethical dilemmas in the at-will doctrine? Which argument do you agree with, that of critics or doctrine or supporters? Are there other limitations that should be imposed on the doctrine other than those outlined in our textbook? What would you make of the doctrine more ethical, therefore fairer? Do you agree that having different laws for public and private sector employees at will versus for just cause is fair? That's the world that we're in today, and for a variety of reasons you can probably see from both sides particular issues. So that's it for today. I'll talk to you guys later.